Hi everybody, welcome back to our lecture series on listening, critical thinking, and logical fallacies. At this point, hopefully you've watched the lecture on listening, and now we are going to be talking about critical thinking. Critical thinking is one of those things that we talk a lot about in academia, as students, as academics, as scholars, but it's kind of hard to pin down. So hopefully by the end of this lecture today, you will have some tools at your disposal to be a better critical thinker. We're going to go over some different concepts. We're going to go over some different types of sources. We're going to go over at least one model of how to use different sources to boost our credibility or our perceived trust in any source or in any information. But first and foremost, we're going to define what critical thinking is, or offer up a few definitions. We're going to go over some tools for evaluating evidence. We are going to review that model, which is called triangulation, and then we're going to watch a couple of YouTube videos on online verification skills. So first and foremost, we need to define what critical thinking is. Now at this point, I would recommend that you pause the video and write down what critical thinking is to you. Come up with your own definition. Maybe do a quick Google search, see what other definitions are out there, and then compare and contrast those definitions, yours, whatever you find, to what I have for you today. Because critical thinking, again, it varies. I think of it more of a state of being. We're more analytical in how we're thinking about things, and we're constantly doing that versus sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to critical think. That's not really how this works. It's something that we hopefully are going to be doing more often throughout our lives once we learn some of the skills. So at this point, pause the video, see if you can come up with your own definition, and then use that to compare and contrast with what we're going to be talking about right now. All right, so hopefully at this point you have your own definition or some options. The definitions I have here are very different, as you'll see. This one is from 1933, and the definition of critical thinking is that it's active, persistent, careful consideration of a belief or supposed form of knowledge in light of the grounds that support it and the further conclusions to which it ends. We have another definition which is much more simple, and it's from 1995. We'll talk about recency in just a little bit. This definition is making reasoned judgments. Both work. It depends. That's the beauty of critical thinking, is that it varies. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to analyze information from a variety of different perspectives so that we can feel confident about the trust that we put in the information and the source, which is what we're going to start talking about at this point. So we're going to go over 7 different concepts, which you can think about as 7 different perspectives that we can use to analyze a source. There's no one concept that is better than the other. There's no one concept that is kind of a one and done, like this works, so we'll use this source. What we want to do is add these concepts or these vocabulary terms to our toolbox to become better, more efficient critical thinkers, so we can analyze information in a more complex manner, and we can say, I trust this source because this, and this. So first up, we have accessibility. So this is exactly what it sounds like. How accessible is the information? Is there a paywall? Who can edit it? How easy is it to find? How easy is it to access? How easy is it to read? We want to think about accessibility in all of its formats. And this is really important because the accessibility of a source will dramatically increase or decrease the number of people who are reviewing that source. And that adds a level of credibility or level of trust that can add or detract from how we should feel about a source. So we want to think about the information. This is one of those things that one of the problems with Wikipedia is who can edit the information. It's too accessible. Whereas, say, a peer-reviewed journal article may be inaccessible in a lot of different ways because there's a paywall. It's hard to read. It's hard to find. Whereas Wikipedia, it's right there, super accessible. So again, we want to weigh those options. We want to weigh the variables that are impacting any individual source. We then want to think about credibility, or our perceived trust of the source, not just the individual source. We want to think about the author, the publication or the publishing source, if there is one. Is it a blog? Is it an article? Is it a peer-reviewed journal article? And also, where is the source coming from, right? We want to think about who paid for it, who's involved with it. All of those things are going to, again, add or detract from the perceived credibility or the perceived trust we have in a source. It's really, really important to think about those author credentials, those publisher credentials, those professional credentials. This is something that we'll go over in much more detail when we go over those YouTube videos. We'll think about how does one credible source work when it's evaluated against another credible source or perceived credible source. Then we have consistency. Consistency relates to the overall field of knowledge, whatever it is, whatever your topic is. So we have two different types of consistency. We have consistency that relates to, like I said, the overall field. So we want to think about, does this author, what they're saying, does it align with commonly held knowledge, commonly held beliefs about that topic? If that topic is well researched, well founded, and is widely considered common knowledge, anything that goes against that should be a red flag for you, because they're going to have to provide a lot of evidence. They're going to have to do a lot to dispel all of the other information that is consistent. So if you're reading something that is consistent with what we might consider to be credible or forceful or reasonable information, it's well researched, that should be a red flag. But you also want to think about consistency within the artifact itself. So is the author using the same language throughout? Are there a lot of qualifiers? So words like probably, maybe, possibly, those things are going to negatively impact the consistency, the perceived force within that source. So we want to think about consistency. Is it consistent with the overall field? Is it consistent throughout the source itself? So we have these three different tests of evidence: accessibility, credibility, consistency. We're going to have four more that are recency, relevance, documentation, and intended audience. Recency relates to time. When was it published? Was it published? When was it last edited? Is something that was published 100 years ago going to be relevant to my paper for my class in 2022? Maybe, maybe not, right? We want to think about that. Just because there's information there doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to contextualize or be relevant to what we're talking about in a modern time. So we want to think about, how does the timing of that impact whether or not we should value that source? We want to think about the relevance of it. Is it actually talking about what we are looking for? Is the source talking about oranges when we're talking about apples, right? The difference there can be profound, but it depends on what you're trying to do. So we want to think about, is your source actually talking about what it says it's talking about? So, quick example here. I had a friend who sent me an article that was related to a particular conspiracy theory. In graduate school, I studied conspiracy theory. So they sent it to me and asked me, what do I think about it? Well, I didn't actually even read the article in itself. I looked at their works cited page, and then I went through and I looked at the different sources to see if the sources that were being cited were actually talking about the same topic in the article. Most of them weren't. So I deemed the supporting material as irrelevant, which for me was a major red flag for that particular source. So I told my friend, hey, the article might be interesting, but none of the information that is being used to support that is actually relevant to the overall topic or the subject of the source. So I didn't even read it, and I wouldn't trust it if I was you. That's one way that you can determine relevance, and that relevance of information used in that source can alter the way that we perceive it. That's not always the best thing to do, but for that particular source, I thought that was the best approach. Again, evaluating information is a judgment. It's a judgment call. There's no right or wrong way to do it in every different situation. You have to make that call. After relevance, we have documentation. So does the author or does the publisher state their sources? How many sources are there? Are the sources relevant? Are they credible? Right? We want to think about those individual sources and how they all interact. Are they consistent, right? So hopefully you're picking up on me using these terms to evaluate aspects of the other concepts. Again, this is not a one and done type of deal. It's not a perfect situation. You need to evaluate different things from a variety of different perspectives, and that's part of what we want to do when we're evaluating information. Last but not least, we have intended audience. So is the audience a popular audience, a professional audience, an academic audience? Who is the author writing for? And this might not seem like a big deal, but it makes a big difference in how accessible the information is, how credible the source is, and overall, whether or not we should use that source. So 2 quick examples here. Number 1 would be like any popular source. So say you're doing a paper and you go to your local bookstore and you pick up a book on that topic. That book is probably useful depending on how you use it. But then you have to, for your assignment, you have to find some peer-reviewed journal articles. So you find those. And now you have to determine which is more credible based on the intended audience. 9 times out of 10 in academia will say that the peer-reviewed journal is going to be the better source because the intended audience is a field of experts and it's been peer-reviewed, whereas the popular source doesn't go through the same rigorous level of analysis as peer review. But again, it's a judgment call, so you want to determine it. So overall, we've gone over 5 or 7 different concepts, 7 different ways to evaluate information. They can all merge together, and you can evaluate any source using any one of them. Again, these are just tools to think about things. A more concrete model that you can use for determining a source's credibility is triangulation, or crap detection. It was developed by Howard Rheingold, and the idea here is that you'll find 3 separate credible sources. This says online sources, but it doesn't have to be. 3 separate credible sources that align with your claim or your stance. So you have source 1, source 2, and source 3 that all support your stance. All 3 of those sources need to be unrelated, and they need to be credible in their own sense. If you're able to do that, you probably have a pretty solid stance. This is a very, very simple method or model for analyzing information and for finding research that supports your stance. So I highly recommend, just anytime you're unsure about something, go and see if you can find 3 independent sources that say the same thing. This will help add some credibility to your stance, regardless of how detailed that stance is. From an academic standpoint, if you are taking a stance on anything, this would require that you have 3 sources for that. So if you're ever wondering, should I have outside research? The answer is yes. So crap detection or triangulation is a really, really useful and effective model for determining whether or not your source or your stance is worthwhile. And at this point, what I'm going to have you do is pause our lecture video, go to Canvas, and find these 4 online verification skills videos. They're with Mike Caulfield. They're very, very short, and they are wildly useful. I think that you will learn a lot from these. Watch these 4 videos and then come back to our lecture. Okay, so hopefully at this point you've watched those 4 videos by Mike Caulfield. I found them to be very, very interesting and very useful for evaluating online information, particularly the idea of lateral reading and comparing sources based on maybe some traditional ways of evaluating credibility, and then using some more modern ways of evaluating credibility, like looking at Wikipedia. I found it was really, really interesting, the experiment that they did that showed that the professional fact checkers were much more effective at determining the credibility or the value of that source than the professors or the students. It's really, really interesting. I think it adds a layer of interest to fact checking in and of itself. But to get back to our topic here, in review, we defined critical thinking loosely, right? So there's a variety of options, and critical thinking might mean something different to everybody, but the overall idea is that we want to evaluate information. We want to actively evaluate information. We went over some tools for doing that. We went over those 7 different concepts or vocab terms that will allow us to hopefully evaluate that information in a variety of different contexts. We went over the model called triangulation, where you look for 3 different sources to support your stance. And then we watched the online verification skills videos with Mike Caulfield. That concludes this particular lecture. I hope that you're able to use these critical thinking skills to your advantage and come up with some really strong sources. Our next video is on logical fallacies. At this point, this video is going to end. The next video will be about logical fallacies. If you have any questions, please reach out. Take care.